It's just after 8:30 on a Wednesday evening in midsummer. A thunderstorm rolls over the Hudson north of the city. Lightning strikes a riverside substation. Two circuit breakers snap open. A loose locking nut, combined with a maintenance and upgrade cycle that hadn't yet reached it, kept one of them from closing again. Downstream, in a control room, the load on the remaining lines begins to climb. Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is July 13th. To understand why a single hour would break New York City, you have to know the state the city was already in. 2 years earlier, in 1975, New York had come within hours of bankruptcy. It owed billions it could not pay and could no longer borrow. To survive, the city handed much of its budget to state and bank oversight and swallowed deep austerity. It cut roughly 40,000 positions, with police, firefighters, teachers, and sanitation crews laid off in large numbers, and further reductions coming through attrition and transfers to the state. Firehouses closed. Subway and bus fares rose from 35 to 50 cents. Between 1969 and 1977, the city shed around 600,000 payroll jobs, and its population fell to levels not seen in decades. By that summer, unemployment stood around 12%, far above the national rate. Over the previous 10 years, rates of murder and assault had more than doubled, and robbery had climbed about tenfold. Whole blocks of the South Bronx had burned and emptied, and a gunman the tabloids called Son of Sam was still at large, shooting young people in parked cars. A city tired of bad news was also afraid. Con Edison, the utility serving the city, operated a large and generally dependable grid. But reliability on an ordinary day is not the same as margin on the worst one. Onto that pressure, the weather now added its own. July 13th fell at the beginning of one of the hottest stretches New Yorkers had felt in years, a heat wave that would hit triple digits 3 times in 9 days. Demand was high across all 5 boroughs, and the grid had little margin to absorb the sudden loss of several major transmission lines. The storm that evening found a system with no slack, and a set of choices that would decide how far the failure spread. The trouble began just after 8:30, when lightning struck the Riverside substation and tripped those 2 breakers. One would not reset. A further strike minutes later knocked out more high-voltage lines carrying power south from the Indian Point nuclear plant. Con Edison was suddenly leaning on fewer and fewer paths to move electricity where it was needed. At 8:45, operators tried to start a fast-start generator by remote command. It failed. The station was unmanned. 10 minutes after the failed generator start, a third strike hit a substation in Yonkers and took out 2 more lines, pushing the survivors past their limits. In the control room, a Con Edison operator asked the regional power pool upstate to shift load off the overloaded lines. He appears to have meant the cross-river circuits near Indian Point, not realizing those had already tripped out in the last strike. The pool operators, who could see those lines were gone, urged him instead to shed load, to cut off blocks of customers deliberately to save the whole. The 2 sides talked past each other, each missing what the other knew. By 9:08, Con Edison began reducing voltage across the system, first by 5%, then 8%. It was too little too late. At 19 minutes past, the last major tie to upstate New York overheated and tripped. Its cables had sagged into an object on the ground. One by one, the remaining lifelines opened. The link to Long Island, then, at 9:30, the final connection to New Jersey. New York was now an electrical island, cut off from every outside source. Its own largest generator, a Queens unit known as Big Alice, shut itself down to avoid damage. At about 36 minutes past 9, roughly an hour after the first failures began, the entire system collapsed. 9 million people went dark. In high-rise towers, water pumps stopped and upper floors lost pressure. Refrigerators went warm and food began to spoil. Trains halted between stations in stifling tunnels, and passengers were walked out along the tracks by flashlight. What followed was not the New York of the last great blackout. Years earlier, in 1965, when the lights failed across the Northeast, the city passed a mostly calm night, later remembered almost fondly. This night ran the other way. In the hardest-hit neighborhoods, Bushwick in Williamsburg and Crown Heights in Brooklyn, Harlem in Manhattan, and stretches of the South Bronx, storefronts were forced open and emptied of everything from food to furniture to televisions. Fires were set in gutted buildings and in the shells of looted stores. Firefighters answered more than 1,000 blazes while chasing roughly double the usual number of false alarms. Mayor Abraham Beame, caught in the Bronx when the power failed, made his way back through dark streets and ordered more than 25,000 city employees to their posts. About half never made it, many because the subways they relied on were dead, and among police, partly because officers were in the middle of a bitter dispute with the mayor over staffing. Governor Hugh Carey sent state police to help. Officials hoped daylight would settle things. In some areas, it brought more looting instead, until, by the second evening, little was left to take. Power returned slowly and in pieces. Part of Queens came back around 7 the next morning. Half the city had service by early afternoon. Not until late that night, about 25 hours after the collapse, was the whole grid alive again. When the counting started, the scale of a single dark night came into focus. Roughly 1,600 stores had been damaged or looted. More than 1,000 fires had burned. Nearly 3,800 people were arrested, enough to overflow precinct cells and jam the courts for days. Property losses ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and the Carter administration eventually sent about $11 million in federal disaster assistance. The harder question was why this blackout became a night of disorder when the 1965 outage had not. Some emphasized the fiscal crisis and the poverty it deepened. Thinned police ranks, shuttered services, and neighborhoods with little left to lose. Others weight the brutal heat, and the plain fact that this outage fell on a working-class summer night rather than a cool autumn evening. Most who study it treat these less as rival answers than as forces that combined. A commission that examined the blackout a year later admitted the limits of any accounting, noting that the social costs were hard to quantify. The political reckoning came faster. Beame charged the utility with, in his phrase, gross negligence. A federal investigation faulted Con Edison's slow and mishandled response for turning a storm into a total collapse, and the utility rebuilt its restoration procedures. Training and documentation still used to bring a grid back from zero. Beame himself lost that year's Democratic primary. The winner, Ed Koch, had campaigned hard on crime. There's one more legacy that's harder to pin down. Several pioneering DJs later said the looting put turntables and mixers into the hands of young people who could not otherwise afford them. That afterward, as one put it, there was a DJ on nearly every block, feeding the young hip-hop scene taking shape in the Bronx and Brooklyn. Scholars treat the claim cautiously. Hip-hop's early history is largely oral, and the effect can't be measured. But the people who lived it keep returning to that night. For years, the blackout was remembered as the low point of New York's modern history. The moment a struggling city seemed to come apart in the dark. Half a century on, as cities lean harder on aging power systems, that is the quiet lesson of July 13th, 1977. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, it's Zach. Real quick before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed the show, all I ask is that you share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. That's the best way to help us out. I'll see you tomorrow.